Whoa. This isn't Big Poopy 69 anymore. It's Politics. Restart the intro.
Hello everyone. Today we'll be doing a rough read through the first chapter of the Stories of the Months and Days by Reginald C. Cousins. Chapter 1, January, the month of Janus. The first month was called Januarius by the Romans, after Janus, the god of doors and gates. We see the same word in Janua, the Latin for a gate or opening, from the idea that a door is a way in, an entrance. It becomes a custom among the Romans to pray to Janus whenever they undertook a new work. He was also the god of the beginning of the day, and it was only natural that when a new month was added at the beginning of the year, it should be named after him. During this month, offerings to the gods were made of meal, frankincense, and wine, each of which had to be quite new. Since the gate opens both ways, Janus was thought to be able to see back into the past and forward into the future, and he was usually represented in pictures as having a double head that looked both ways. On the earliest Roman coins, he is drawn with two bearded faces, with a staff in one hand and a key in the other. He was also the protector of trade and shipping, and on some coins his head is shown with the prow of his ship. When people wished to picture him as the god of the year, they drew him holding the number 300 in one hand and 65 in the other. Janus is worshipped on the Janiculum, the hill of Janus, one of the 7 hills on which Rome was built. Since he was the god of gates, all the gates of Rome were under his care, especially the archway through which the army marched to war and by which it returned. This archway was afterwards replaced by a temple which was called Janus Quadriferens, that is, four-sided, because it was square. On each side of the building there were 3 windows and 1 door, making 12 windows and 4 doors, which represented the 12 months and the 4 seasons. In time of war, the temple gates were kept wide open since people were continually making offerings to the gods, but whenever there came a time of peace, the gates were at once closed. As we know the Romans were continually fighting, it does not surprise us to find that the gates of the temples were closed only 3 times in 700 years. Janus was said to be the son of Apollo, the god of the sun, whose daily task it was to drive across the sky in his chariot of fire. Each morning, when Aurora, the goddess of the dawn, had opened the gates of the east, Apollo set forth, and when his task accomplished, he reached the western coast, and he returned to his palace in the east. Quote, "And the gilded car of day his glowing axle doth allay, and the steep Atlantic stream, and the sloped sun his upward beam, shoots against the dusky pole, pacing towards the other goal of his chamber in the east." End quote. Milton. Comus. Apollo had another son named Phaeton, who on one day persuaded his father to allow him to drive the sun chariot. All went well for a time, and then Phaeton, being a reckless boy, began to drive too fast. He soon lost control of the horses, which plunged madly along the bore in the chariot from its track. It went so close to the earth that the fields were scorched, the rivers were dried up, and even people were turned black, and they are black to this day. The cries of the terrified people attracted the attention of Jupiter, the king of the gods, who became enraged when he caught sight of the darling boy in the chariot of the sun. Taking up one of the thunderbolts, he hurled it at Phaeton, who, scorched by its fire, fell headlong to the earth. Another sad story told of Apollo is that of his friendship with a youth named Hyacinthus, to talk with whom Apollo used often to come down to the earth. Zephyrus, the god of the south wind, was very fond of Hyacinthus too, and one day as Apollo and Hyacinthus was playing a game of quotas, Zephyrus came by. Filled with jealousy at the sight of Apollo and his friend, he blew Apollo's quoit aside so that it struck Hyacinthus and killed him. Apollo was greatly distressed at his friend's death, and in order that he might never be forgotten, changed the fallen blood drops into clusters of flowers, which are called hyacinths. Quote, "For so Apollo with an unsweating hand whilom did slay the dearly loved mate, young Hyacinthus born on Eurotas to stand, young Hyacinthus to pride of Spartan land, but then transformed him to a purple flower." End quote. Milton. Another flower we should always be reminded us of Apollo is the sunflower. A story says that there once lived a girl named Clete, and that each day, with eyes full of love for the fair sun god, she watched him journey across the sky. But Apollo, knowing nothing of her love, took no heed, to her as he passed. Cleety watched for him day after day on the river brink, and her heart sank as each evening she saw his chariot dip down into the west. She would not leave the river bank, but stayed all through the cold night, anxiously waiting for the first flash of the sun's rays from the glowing east. At last the gods took pity on her and changed her into a sunflower. Her green dress became green leaves, and her golden hair became yellow petals. Now she was happy indeed, for she knew that she could always see Apollo, and you'll find that to the day, sunflowers turns its head towards the sun as it moves across the sky. Aurora, the goddess of the dawn, whom we have mentioned as opening the gates of the east for the sun god Apollo, married a mortal, Tithonus, a prince of Troy. In order that their happiness might know no end, Aurora begged Jupiter to grant Tithonus immortality. The wish was granted, but in her anxiety that Tithonus should never be taken from her by death, Aurora forgot to ask for the gift of eternal youth, and as years went on, Tithonus grew old and weak and became only a burden to her. At length, tired of his shrill voice and constant complaints, she turned him to a grasshopper, whose shrill complaining note is known to all. The name for this month among the angels and Saxons was Wolf Month, since it was the time of year when the wolves were unable to find food and their hunger made them bold enough to come into the villages. That was chapter 1 of Stories of the Months and Days by Reginald T. Cousins. Thank you for listening. It's been 2 weeks since I've uploaded. Make sure you like and subscribe. Thank you.